Welcome to the Spring 2025 World Affairs Lecture. As I prepare to just say a few words to kick this off today, I went back to look at our previous World Affairs lectures, and I have sort of speakers and topics going back to the year 2001. So that's before most of the students who are on the call today. We have 64 attendees here, and I'm sure most of them are FIT students. And so that's before most of them were born. So I just had a quick look at the topics that we were covering in the, around 2000, 2001, up to 2005. And perhaps it's no surprise to those of us who study political science, politics, economics, and sort of related fields that we talked about things like globalization, human rights, will there be peace in the Middle East? So I think the moral of the story is that we just have to keep talking about these things and doing our best to be informed citizens of the world. So it's really with that spirit that I welcome you all to the World Affairs lecture today. My job is really easy. I get to introduce Professor Mushtaq, who is the host and moderator of today's event. Professor Mushtaq is an assistant professor of journalism at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. Her research is about queer Muslim women and their intersecting identities. And she's also a trained journalist with a focus on conflict, gender, and politics. She's worked in various newspapers, magazines, and television productions. And besides all that, she's been collaborating on a visual ethnography on nomads and weavers of many parts of the world. So you'll get to hear about that today. And how the impacts of globalization impact the lives of these nomadic communities. So without further ado, I turn the floor over to Professor Mushtaq. Thank you so much.
Dr. Levine, it is an honor to be back moderating another World Affairs lecture series. I mean, it's incredible to be a part of this incredible series that has been going on since 2001. And today's event is especially meaningful to me as it combines my work with Dr. Praveen Chaudhary in a collaboration that is both personal and impactful. The photo exhibition, which is titled Resistance and Resilience, The Weavers of Oaxaca, currently on display at FIT, showcases photographs that Dr. Chaudhary and I made over the course of 3 years. And we are incredibly grateful to Isabella for being an incredible and amazing research assistant, and she was able to connect us with our sources. And this exhibition is a part of a larger visual ethnography project that spans nomadic and weaving communities in the Himalayas, the Taurus Mountains in Turkey, and in Mexico. And through this collaboration, we aim to explore how marginalized communities reclaim their narratives, how they challenge stereotypes, and then also advocate for social change. And this work holds a special place in my heart as it reflects both our artistic vision and our shared commitment to amplifying these important voices. So before I introduce our speaker for the day, I would like to play a short video of our current photo project. Dr. Emre Osoz is going to do that for us.
There is no sound.
Thank you, Dr. Osos. And we apologize for the lack of sound. There has been some technological issues happening since morning, so we apologize for that. Now it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our speaker for this semester's World Affairs Lecture Series, Marta Turok. Marta Turok is an anthropologist who specializes in Mexican folk art and socio-economic development. Marta has collaborated with various Mexican government agencies, including the National Indigenous Institute, the Popular Culture Office, and Fawn Art. She also founded AMACUP, which is a non-profit organization that designs contemporary products based on traditional techniques. Her publications include Cómo acercarse a la artesanía and El Caracol Púrpura, una tradición milenaria en Oaxaca, along with numerous articles. She's a pioneer in analyzing the symbolism in Chiapan textiles and has trained artisans in marketing and environmental sustainability. She has also served as a judge in Mexican craft competitions for over 40 years and is a strong advocate for preserving Mexico's sacred purple snail and other indigenous cultural heritage. Marta has also earned multiple awards. And she was born in Mexico to parents from Boston. She studied anthropology and socioeconomic development at Tufts, Harvard, and National Autonomous University of Mexico, and later earned a marketing certificate from UC Berkeley in 1996. As an expert in Mexican ethnic textiles and folk art, Marta researched Frida Kahlo's textile collection in 2006 for several exhibits. Throughout her career, Marta has mentored students and professionals on ethical and sustainable practices in the craft sector. She was a curator at the Ruth D. Lechuga Folk Art Center until 2024 and is currently an independent researcher and curator. Welcome, Marta. We're very, very honored to have you here.
I want to thank the whole team. We did do an exercise connecting to the webinar and it worked. And the video had sound. But anyway, that's how this works. Well, I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour. We're trying to keep it to 30 minutes on the history of Mexican textiles, general, but focusing also on Oaxaca, since that is where the project is being done. And the idea of resilience is through the history, we're going to see that there have been a series of historical situations that could have wrought havoc. However, that resilience is how changes were incorporated and how things that are important to ethnic groups of Oaxaca have actually maintained for more than 500 years. So let's get on with the presentation.
Pulling that up right now.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to tell Isabella next, because I wasn't able to get my presentation directly into the...
That's totally fine.
Yeah, just so they know. Okay, so let's look at Oaxaca. Oaxaca is the richest biocultural and diverse state of Mexico. Mexico has 30 states plus what would be the equivalent, 31 states plus the federal district, which is now called City of Mexico. So if we look at this, we can see that here's Mexico, here's Oaxaca down at very south, bordering the southern Pacific, excuse me, and all of this is the vegetation. So this vegetation also has a correlation. You can correlate it with the 16 ethnic groups that developed over hundreds and thousands of years before the arrival of the Spaniards. And 6 of them are in high degree of risk. However, I mean, what I want to point out is diversity. And now let's go on to the next one. Let's look at this diversity, how it plays out in costume. I find costume a very useful way of talking about textiles because it represents cultural identity from the village, from the ethnic group. And you can see we will try to figure out what are the differences and the similarities of these costumes. I just want to point out the huipil, the long gown, is fundamental. It's a pre-Hispanic garment. We'll see that in a minute. But then we also have European style blouses and skirts. And how this happened is fascinating. We don't always know how it happened, yet by the 19th century, when we had more visuals, then we could see them. Next.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, did you jump? Yeah. The textile arts among the indigenous groups, both Oaxaca and other communities, are considered a sacred gift from the Catholic virgins and the saints to their daughters. However, this comes from pre-Hispanic times. The codices in pre-Hispanic times show the pre-Hispanic deities also doing the various parts of textiles. And so they are a gift. And in Chiapas, for example, Magdalena's, where I did my original field work, the Virgin dresses the same as the steward's wife. So there is this very intricate relationship, ideological, cosmogonic, between weaving virgin saints and ancient deities. Next. Here we can see this is a ceremonial huipil worn in the previous slide, and we see the technique. The technique is what they call brocading or supplementary warps. And this diamond, you can see in a larger scale in a 600th century carving from the archaeological site of Yaxchilan. So there is also a continuity in design, although some adaptations. Next. Here we see once again, we see a procession, the steward's wife wearing the same kind of huipil that the Virgin of Magdalena's does. And this is an 18th century painting. And we see the Spaniards brought in the Catholic religion and the idea of the processions. However, the indigenous people made them their own. Next. Here we have, how do we know that this is a 2,500-year-old textile tradition? Well, even though this is a 1550 codex, we have found spindles that are made from clay and certain textiles, but all of the other tools are organic and they have not survived. This is not the dry coast of Peru where you have the world's largest samples of 1,000-year-old traditions. However, we know that these are the parts to weaving, spinning and weaving, and I won't go into detail. Next. The Aztecs were very famous because they were imperialistic and they went and conquered the neighboring villages as far as they could get. And what they did was discover what was being produced in that region and then exact tribute from the people. And so we have, look at the beautiful textiles, but also simple textiles, striped textiles with natural brown cotton and white. And again, very, very elaborate textiles. Next. White cotton, brown cotton, and these are little bags of cochineal that was, at that time, was cultivated in Oaxaca and tributed by Oaxacan highland tribes. Next. Here we have the idea of the spinning. The oldest spinning whorls, clay whorls, are 1500 BC, which would make them 3,500 to 4,000 years old. And this is interesting because the mother is telling the daughter, you want your tortilla, you know, the tortilla is what Mexicans used to eat with. It's a flat bread. Well, then you want to eat, then you have to spin. Next. Here we have a contemporary spinner, beautiful photograph. Next. And here we have the weaver. Here's the backstrap loom or the waist loom. And we have, again, the mother telling the daughter, you want to eat? Well, then you've got to weave, and you have to weave well. The idea of quality is intrinsic to the craft. And here are some of the pieces, and you can see how it wraps around her waist and is held by a tree or anything that they can wrap around the top end of the loom. Next. Shapes, the most important clothing for Oaxaca. I'm not including the Kishkemetl because that's outside of Oaxaca. The most important clothing garment over the body is the huipil, which in international marketing is called the kaftan. And Mexico has called the marketers and the designers to please use the word huipil to respect the local name and maybe put kaftan at the end of it. Now, huipil kaftan or kaftan huipil, because we think that it is culturally appropriate to respect the local name. And then the wraparound skirt, and the wraparound skirt is placed in different kinds of what's the word? I practiced of pliegues of help me, Isabella.
Waistbands. And
No.
kind of pleats.
Pleats, thank you. Because a wraparound skirt is sustained by a sash and then you accommodate the pleats according to your culture. Next. Here's just an example of, imagine the color and the variety. The Spaniards admired that. They just admired the amount of colors but they really weren't interested because we have very little information, historical information or detail of how things were made, where the dyes came from. You have to sort of read into many of the 16th century Spanish, 16th, 17th century Spanish travelers and conquistadors to glean more information. Next. Sizes, a huipil, as you saw in the earlier drawings, can be very long or can be very short. It can be 3 webs, it can be 2 webs, it can be 1 web. Well, we call web, and some people tell me that it would be better to call it a panel. But it's the same thing, a panel, a web. Next. And textile techniques are amazing, the variety of textile techniques. So we have, when the Spaniards arrive, we have really a well-developed textile industry applied to many products, but here I'm focusing on garments. Next. Comes the conquest. We have the Spaniards coming, and then by the end of in 1525, they conquer, they arrive in 1519. By 1525, they've conquered Mexico, and it takes them a while to get to the north and to other places. And they impose a series of garments. And this is what is called a casta painting, 18th century, a glimpse into costume evolution. You begin to see, this would be an indigenous woman with the huipil and the wraparound skirt, but then you start seeing other kinds of garments that I will go into very, very quickly. Next. What comes? Wool. We're unlike Peru, unlike South America that had the camelids, camel-derived llama, vicuña, and alpaca, we didn't have any. What they used for warmth were feathers, excuse me, feathers or rabbit hair that they would spin. So we have the arrival of sheep, we have the arrival of silk cocoons, and we have the arrival of the spinning wheel and the treadle loom, which you saw in the video. So these come with the Spaniards. Next. Here's this you saw in the video, the spinning wheel and the backstrap and the treadle loom. Next. Scissors, metallic needles, and embroidery techniques. We have not found, other than very simple stitches to unite a couple of webs or panels, we have not found true embroidery in any of the pre-Hispanic samples. Next. I love this painting. It's 1856. It's the Holy Week procession in near Mexico City. And what we have in the center of the painting are a man wearing a serape and a woman wearing a rebozo, a skirt with a waistband and a blouse. And these would be considered mestizo outfits. They are native to Mexico, but as of the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries on. Next. Here is an example of how those European peasant blouses were introduced and adapted. They also have as much variety and diversity as do the huipiles. It's interesting. Clothing in Mexico really is a cultural expression. And here we have some of the techniques. Next. Here are the tapestry technique, the serapes. What we saw in the video, although we didn't have a finished product, is this technique, the tapestry technique, where it interlocks, where the warp is much thinner than the weft. So the weft covers the warp and you introduce these very intricate designs. And that is one of Mexico's best kept secrets, is the extant 18th, 19th, 20th century serapes. It is still being done with a different kind of use, more decorative than utilitarian, especially in Oaxaca. It's more rugs. Next. Now let's go into a quick Oaxacan visual overview of the diversity, the Cuicatec and Chinatec Indians. They have weft face, they have a supplementary weft, but they also have embroidery that they've introduced. And here we see the backstrap loom. So they've woven, if they're doing supplementary weft, the designs are introduced as they weave. And if they're embroidered, they are done after it's taken off the loom. And it's a modular style because the panels are maybe 12 inches, 14 inches. So you have to create the size by adding panels. And that's why you have this very nice decorative stitching to show where the panels are. Next. Here again, another community. And here she is painting over with aniline dye. They've lost that tradition. They're not doing that anymore. However, this was to hide the designs from prying eyes. And this was to protect the woman. And that's very important. You'll notice that there's usually, and I can't say always, there's usually a central panel on the front and the back. And those are considered windows to the cosmos, and it's a protection for the woman. Next. Here we have our favorite Frida, and she's wearing a Chinantec huipil. She is best known for the Tehuana. We'll see her in a few minutes, but she also had other indigenous groups and a good representation of Oaxacan huipiles. And so here she is in Leo Matisse's photograph, and here we have the huipil in living color in the Casa Azul collection. Next. The Mazatec are neighbors to the Chinantec, so it's similar but not the same. And that's very important to point out. We have 68 ethnic groups, 100 languages, and dozens of different communities that still wear their traditional clothing. And so it's really a chance to open your eyes and exercise your memory and do memory cards. Remember the memory cards? And try to say, oh, this is from this place and this is from this other place, and it's an ethnic group and it's a community. Next. The Zapotec from Yalalag are very well known also, and their jewelry. So, I mean, costume would be another talk. But here we're talking about more textiles. Next. Here's a Yalalag huipil. And the stitching that goes up and down is supposed to be a snake. It represents a snake. And I think that's interesting how even though the technique was brought in from Europe, over the centuries, there has been an assimilation and giving meaning to what comes from the outside. Next. These are amuzgos. Now we're coming down to the coast. And this would be supplementary warp. This is supplementary weft. And this is supplementary weft, making it look like embroidery, which is amazing because they're now going into circles, into round and not just into geometric, 90 degree angles. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next. The triquis that are in northern, I think there's a triqui piece in the exhibit right now from the triquis. It's a shawl, but here I focused on the huipil. It's the longest huipil in Mexico, and it's a place where it's cold, so they're combining wool and cotton in their clothing. And the weft designs patterns are called the life of a butterfly. So each design is a representation from cocoon to butterfly. Next. And the coast, we have this is silk that is grown in northern, among the northern Mixtec, and is traded into the coastal Mixtec and incorporated into the textiles. Originally, it was dyed with cochineal. Now it is dyed mostly with aniline dyes. Next. Here we have a woman at the backstrap loom. She isn't wearing anything to cover her. That's the way they were. But then when the roads were brought in, somebody added a little baby doll apron, which is unfortunate, but they've adopted it and one cannot question what a group adopts. And this would be how the huipil is worn for the wedding. Next. Here, also the Mixtec cover a large swath of the coast, and each village has a different huipil and a different way of wearing it. Next. This is also a wedding. This is an older photograph of she's the wife, the bride, the groom, and the mother. And back then, really, the ceremonial was very similar to the daily, but the way she wore it is what gave it its ritual use. Next. The men, I'm not going to get too much into the men, but there's this very, very strange way of wearing this very long shirt, and then the pants are wrapped till they become almost like shorts. Next. Now we're going to look at something that comes, a European peasant style blouse. This is quite well known. It's they're from Chilateca and San Antonino, and the shape is European, the embroidery is of European origin, yet they've given it this amazing identity that you see it and you know it. And well, it's been a favorite, one of the favorite blouses to be copied by international companies. Next. Next, Isabella.
Yep, sure.
Oh, okay. Now I want to hopefully quickly look at 3 marvelous dyes that are found in different parts of the West Coast and Mexico, but I'm going to focus on what Isabella meant. No, not Isabella. What was mentioned in my bio about how I have focused on protecting the purple snail. So this is a wraparound skirt from Pinotepa de Don Luis, from the coast, and 3 marvelous dyes next that come into Oaxaca. Well, from the pre-Hispanic times, we see that these colors plus yellow, I'm not going to get into the yellow right now, there are many sources of yellow, but we find that purple, indigo, and red are very prevalent in textiles. Next. And this would be the indigo plant, this would be the cochineal, and this would be the snail. It's a murex, part of the murex family. It's called Plicopurpura pansa. Next. So you grow the prickly pear and it hosts the cochineal insect. You grow the indigo and you process it in a vat to separate the organic materials from the dye. And the purpura is done with strict knowledge by the Mixtec Indians. Many Indian groups used it, but it only survived among the Mixtec of Pinotepa de Don Luis, and it's applied directly to the skein. And we worked on a law back in the 80s. We worked on a law so that it would be recognized and protected. And when we did the ethnoscientific studies, we discovered that the Mixtec Indians knew 90% of the cycle, the life cycle, and had applied 3 bands, which made it a tradition, maybe 1,000 years or more, of sustainable use of this dye. Next. Here the skeins are then brought back into the community, and the women put them out to the sun. And here we see that skirt being done in the on the, oh dear.
The hanging, like the hanging line what you have.
No, here they're hanging, but here she's using the warp. She's warping the skirt. Next. And my message here is we're all in love with natural dye, and we have to really be careful, take 2 steps back or 3 steps back and look at each dye, because natural, the word natural and the word sustainability are not equal. You can be, if you're using and taking from the wild, trees, wild flowers, wild raw materials, you're putting that resource at risk because you don't know the life cycle, you don't know how much you can take from nature, and the whole idea is to tend towards resource management and cultivation. That is what we should be focusing on as the demand for natural dyes grows and grows. And that's been one of my focuses for 40 years. It was purpura that got me onto that. And I'm surprised that we have advanced so little in that field. Next. The Tehuana, which is very famous, Frida made it very famous, is a mestizo construction. It comes from pre-Hispanic and then European and Asian additions. Next. Here we see, and this very, very interesting headpiece that I can't go into. It's a transformer. You wear it, either the neck can go around your face and the bottom can go in back, like Native American
Headgear.
Headdress, yeah.
headdress. Yeah. Next. And interesting, in the 20th century, they started decorating these huipiles and skirts. And you have the satin stitch, you have a crochet needle that punctures the cloth, and you get floral designs. And then you have this little Singer machine for that goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and they have dominated this tool to the point where they create art with it. So I am not against machine embroidery driven by the hand and with a lot of creativity. We shouldn't put it down. Next. Next, Isabella. Here we have our favorite Frida dressed up. Next. 2 paintings where she actually wears. We found these 2 headdresses in her wardrobe, and she actually would wear the things that she was painting herself with, which was one of the things I discovered when I got to study her wardrobe. Next. And this is a bit to wrap up my presentation. Here we have a very apparently nondescript outfit, a skirt with a waistband, and a European style shirt, more than a blouse shirt, because it has 3/4 sleeves, and machine embroidery. Next. And there is a French designer who loved it. She went up to the village and bought a blouse and took it to India and started her production. And I mean, the only thing that differed was that she did a little styling with the sleeves, no? And so this was discovered by now Susanna Hart. She is now a senator, and she was very upset because it said made in India. And she says, why didn't she work with the local women? And this was back in 2015. It's already 10 years now. And this spearheaded a growing consciousness. She enacted laws, and we are working on finding a middle ground for shared benefits, which are in process between artisans and designers, especially on the international scale. And it doesn't mean you can't buy and sell traditional garments or clothing, but it does mean that if you're going to intervene, especially if you're going to take it to another country, you need permission from the community, or you have to retribute the community in a mutually beneficial fashion. The best thing would be to work locally. Next. And when this whole discussion was going on, somebody made this drawing. And I would never, never have imagined that these machine stitches that came into the village maybe 80 years ago have a meaning. The blouse, once again, is a means of protection. It has the landscape. It's a description of the landscape of the community, the agave plant, the sun, the mountains, the paths, water, flowers, earth, and offering. And I think that we should not look at textiles just for their appearance. And I like it and I don't like it. No, this will work into a nice kaftan, whatever. We really should be more attentive to what the clothing means to the people. And if we want to develop products, we should always be working with the local artisans and looking for the right permits to work with them. The first thing is to open one's eyes and to be close and to study. I think that's it, right, Isabella?
Yep, I think so. I think we're all wrapped up. Okay, let's see. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Marta, for that insightful presentation. I mean, we have so much to process and think about with what you have shared with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, Suzanne.
Really appreciate it. I just want to remind our attendees, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat option. Meanwhile, Marta, as you were presenting, you talked about mothers teaching and encouraging their daughters to weave, right? Like even saying, if you want to eat tortilla, you have to spin, right? I was wondering, in your presentation, when you were talking about, that story, I did not hear any mention of men being involved in spinning and weaving. Is that something that has traditionally occurred, that it's always women who have been involved in weaving and spinning, or do you want to throw some light on that?
Well, in the 20th century, very, very few men were involved in weaving. In spinning, yes, in one case, which is spinning the agave fiber in central Mexico. It's a very long fiber, and you can walk along on the path or on the highway or wherever you're working, and you can be spinning. The other spinning materials, the other raw materials are very short. Wool, cotton, silk. Well, silk is continuous, but they did something different in Mexico. And the men were not being involved in that. So what happened in pre-Hispanic times, we don't know. But we don't see men portrayed in any of the codices, both pre-Hispanic and 16th century codes. So this was a woman's world. And yes, I didn't talk about it, and it's changing. Because in lieu of diversity and finding new paths, mostly young men, this is something that's been going on for maybe 15 years. More and more, we find young men getting involved in the textile world among indigenous people. Now, Oaxaca Mitla is an exception. There's Arturo was using the backstrap loom, and then they were also using the treadle loom, which has been more for men because it came from Europe and it uses different parts of the body. So I'm contradicting myself. Very few exceptions, among them Mitla and Teotitlán del Valle. You do have the men doing some of the spinning and weaving.
Thank you so much. Before I ask my question, I see there's a question from one of the audience members. And it's a question from Victoria, and she wants to know, in the beginning, I noticed you refer to the clothing as costumes. I usually think of costumes as entertainment or like a playful thing. Is there a reason why it would not be considered a traditional wear?
Very good point. Maybe I'm not being politically correct or updated, because the when you look at universities that have given courses, it's always referred to as costume, traditional costume. And yes, costume has also come into cosplay and things like that, and that has sort of made it a little more complex. So the idea of costume is that it's a complete outfit. It's the outfit, not just a single garment. And costume studies, maybe we have to rethink the term. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. I have a question because you raised a very important point in your presentation about culturally appropriating indigenous art, right? You talked about how we need to respect local names like weepeels, like how they are being called kaftans in the market, right? And then how these big designers and big design brands, they're actually stealing from indigenous Mexican artists. How do you think that impacts the cultural heritage of indigenous communities? And there's a question by someone in the audience as well, which is sort of related to what I'm just asking. It's by Holly, and they want to know, what are the biggest challenges indigenous artisans face, and how can their craftsmanship be best preserved?
I didn't include, due to time restraints, something that is even more worrisome than the cultural appropriation by, I mean, they're both worrisome in different scales. It used to be that the Mexican law, the authorial rights, said all you have to do is recognize where it's from because it is public domain. And so some of the people would take and reinterpret, or take, as Isabel, your tocaya, as Isabel Marant did, and literally take it somewhere else and do it. So there were varying degrees, and there was nothing, and there is nothing yet in the international authorial rights. What we have been focusing is on bad publicity, on shame on you. In other words, a lot of, for the international designers. However, Mexican laws have been changed. I'm in the middle of a discussion that puts a project I'm working on at risk, because it says you have to ask the community for its approval. You can't just get the artisan you're working with or their family or the group of artisans. You now need the community approval. And I don't know how it's going to play out. Yesterday, I was with Senator Susana Harp. I said, I think we opened up a can of worms, Susana, because there's going to be a point where it all just closes into itself. And she says, well, the law says you can buy and sell. Yes, but we're talking about projects, about development projects. And that's where it gets, or applying to other things, where it gets very tricky. Now, impact, the impact has been really relatively minimal, because even international labels are not inundating the market. I mean, they have a production, and there's a lot of competition out there. There's, Southeast Asia and South America, et cetera, et cetera. However, you have to work with the indigenous people, or the people who own that tradition, to talk to them about, is this considered part of your heritage? And as part of your heritage, how do you want to defend it? Because we have found that there isn't really a direct connection between these brands that sell outside of Mexico and the indigenous people. Now, what is happening now? Asian machinery has been introduced into one community down on the coast, and it is a digital embroidery. And they are now doing the Isthmus of Tehuantepec embroidery. They're doing Mazatec bird embroidery, and they're now even doing Chiapas diamond embroidery. And I'm going, listen, I mean, we're focusing on the outside, and what about inside? What is going on? And they sell them in Oaxaca, and they give you this big story about, yes, how they're made and da-da-da, and they're not. You have to know how to look in the back and see that it's not only machine, because it's not hand machine. That's why I said I'm all for hand machine made, but this is digital industrial, where they pour out 20 blouses per minute. Yeah, I mean, it's a little more than that. But that, to me, is more of a danger of substitution, where it looks like, and rather than international designers. However, I do think that everybody should be attentive to this. And I don't know if the government is going to close down those workshops, because the machines are in the hands of indigenous people. And so it gets, since this is a forum for bigger picture, you know, the bigger picture there is, it gets complicated, but there has to be, you want to protect the artisans, and you've got to protect them across the board.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. My next question is connected with the symbolic meaning of some of the designs. And please bear with me, because my question is also connected with some of the questions that audience has asked. So I'm just gonna first ask my question, then read some of the questions that our audiences have asked, which are very similar to what I was gonna ask you. So you talked a lot about how repeals, like there are different styles of wearing. And I was wondering, in the context of Oaxaca's rich textile tradition, do you believe every design carries a specific cultural or symbolic meaning? And how do you think that interpretation of those designs might vary between the artisans who create them and then the broader public who either wear them or admire them? And in the spirit of the question about symbols and the designs, Diana has asked a question. Do you have any book or article recommendations more on the topic of the embroidered symbols? Then there is another question similar to about the symbols from CAJ, and they're asking, do symbols apply to adult males that cannot be applied to boys' clothing? And another question from CAJ is, do you have any contact information on who to contact to ask if a motif or design belongs to the indigenous community? I'm so sorry, Marta. I know I just threw a couple of questions at you. If you need me to repeat, I will be more than happy to do that. But I thought all these questions were connected with one another.
Okay. I don't know if I can answer them all right off the bat, but I can send bibliography to FIT, and you can share it with the students. Symbolism, what I found, what I discovered when I started getting involved in the village of Magdalenas in Chiapas and other communities of Chiapas, was that it was not known by everybody. It was a restricted knowledge, especially for the ceremonial huipiles and the men's sash. Because I asked, I did field work, and I asked, and some knew and some didn't. And my teacher knew, but there was a limit to what she was willing to share with me. And so some of my work was based on what we would call transferential analysis of, here's a ritual, here is the importance of corn and the importance of stars and this and that and the other. And then for that specific huipil, I made a reading. I turned it into a text because it lent itself. But Abrila, my teacher, never told me, oh yeah, look, you're going to read the huipil this way. So whatever, and the other big thing to consider is that I was one of the first people to learn the language, to be able to speak to the older women in their language, as did Walter F. Morris. And other people, other anthropologists and colleagues who had been there 30 years before me, 40 years, just said, oh, nothing's known about the symbolism, it's lost. And so we have this opportunity that was lost. And many times they didn't want to talk about the symbolism. So there is a fetish around symbolism. Yeah, what's a symbol? And then it's turned into part of the advertising and the promotion. And once again, I think that if it is something that wants to be shared and is still extant, the symbolism, we're finding that they're inventing a symbol. Oh, you want the symbolism? Sure, okay, here's something. And so we're inducing some of the younger generations to say, oh yeah, it's this, it's that. Maybe they pick something up from the past and then they build a meaning around it. So I would be very careful. The other thing is adult males and boys. Well, because men are the first to leave the community and go out, that's the clothing, the traditional clothing that was lost first. From the 60s on, we find a more and more pronounced substitution and loss of the male clothing. Maybe it has persisted in ritual clothing and especially for sale. No, they'll do beautiful traditional men's outfits like the tacuates that I showed you, where it's all sort of the pants are rolled up and it becomes a short. And I know of no traditional tacuate using it in any context. So whether it's a male or a female, and if and when there was symbolism and still is today, it will have to do with male roles. It will have to do with that which will protect the men in their work. And very little has been written, unfortunately, very little. I think it's a good project to work on, but we're with
Maybe that will be your next project, right, Marta?
well, I have 3 before that one, but we can
Add it
accumulate.
to the list.
Add it to the list, exactly.
Okay, we don't have much time, but I just want
I
to,
know.
there's a question from Henry who says, hi, Marta, it's great presentation. Thank you. I am interested in the paneling section of the huipil. Is there any particular reason the artisans use 3 panels? Is this related to the width of their looms?
To the what? The
To
last
the
part?
width, to the width of their looms.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, what happens if you want to go to 2 feet width on a backstrap loom, the edges are going to get all skewered because they're not tense. So the 12 inches to about 20 inches is the maximum that they will be weaving. In Chiapas, the wool is woven much broader, but then they do a process with hot water and they to make it thicker. I can't remember the word, sorry about that. However, you will have huipiles that are 1 panel, huipiles that are 2 panels, and huipiles that are 3 panels. In Oaxaca, you have mostly 3 panel. That's why the photograph, you can see that there's a lot of 3 panel, and it also varies in the length. So it has to do with the limitations of the loom and how they worked around it to create their silhouette. It really has a lot to do with silhouette, what they want to look like. The small, it's a drop sleeve. It becomes a drop sleeve, and it might cover the skirt. It might be at the edge of the skirt, etc. So that it does have to do with technology.
Thank you, Marta. I will just ask one last question to you because, again, we are running out of time. Luigi wanted to know, in the past, who would buy the fabric? Did the transaction mostly happen within one village where the weaver lived or across villages? Would the customers buy directly from the weavers in the past?
Well, first, there is a point where 80% of the clothing is made in the by the family. Some of the parts of the clothing, such as sashes, might not be made in the village and are made in neighboring villages. And so they're traded. And as I did point out, the silk was being grown in cold country in the northern part of the Mixtecs. The Mixtecs cover a swath that goes from the highlands to midlands to lowlands, and they would and they still do. They will grow the silk, they will spin the silk, they will dye the silk, and then the little silk skeins by the ounce are sent down to the specific fiestas for the Holy Week, for Lent, and are sold there, are traded. Now, this we know from historical times, but we do not know from pre-Hispanic times if this trading was going on. We do know that luxury items from pre-Hispanic times were being traded, like spondylus, brass and copper and spondylus shell and jade. All of these we find way far away from where they were, where their origin is. So we know that at the level of the theocrats, that was happening. As the conquest comes, some of these things were imposed. You're going to buy this from this other community, and you're going to have to sell your labor. The Spaniards did this to make themselves richer. So as it is, there have been routes of exchange, but the weaving was usually done locally.
Thank you so much, Marta, for your time and for sharing your knowledge with all of us.
I wish we had another hour, but we don't.
I know. I would love to continue this conversation because there is so much that we can learn from you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time and the knowledge that you shared with all of us today. And on behalf of FIT, I'm really grateful to you. I am handing over the reins to Dr. Levine now, who will take over from here.
Thank you so much, Marta. I did not know much about this topic, and I feel like I've learned a lot, which is always wonderful. And I
Yes.
think today's questions by our attendees were really top-notch. I mean, it seems like we have some either experts or eager learners in the audience for sure. But an event like this is really made by so many people working together. So we have a lot of people to thank. I'll start by thanking Marta. Thank you so much to our speaker, to our moderator, Professor Souzeina Mushtaq, to our department members, Professor Chaudhry and Professor Osos, and our student aide, Isabella. Thank you all so much. But also beyond the people on this that you can actually see today, we'd like to thank Professor Daniel Benkendorf, the chairperson of the Department of Social Sciences, and Dean Patrick Knisley, the Dean of the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And we would also like to thank Monica Mendoza Bravo, the chairperson of Global Fashion Management at Centro, Mexico City, for getting us, introduce us to Marta Turok, and for providing samples of textiles and fabrics. Thank you everybody so much, and we hope to see you again in the fall with another fabulous topic to discuss together. Thank you. One